CURES is sponsored by Wheeler Health's Better Choice program. More at wheelerhealth.org.
Helping you lead a healthier life. This is CURES.
Welcome back, everyone. Time now for what we like to call free therapy on the CURES show, where we explain, we explore the wellness for your mind, body, and spirit with our friend, Hartford Healthcare Institute of Living psychologist, Dr. Laura Saunders. Thanks for being with us, Doctor. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Kara.
Yeah, we're talking about something that, as a mom, I think we all want to do this. We want to raise the best kids we can, but there's a lot of science that is out there on what really matters. And so we're going to talk about 7 parenting tips to raise resilient children. Let's just start there. Regardless of where you come from, socioeconomic background, anything, resilience, grit, that is the common denominator to create a healthy adulthood.
That is the common denominator to create a healthy life, right? Having resilience, having grit, having the ability to work through adversity. The reality is we all have struggles. Even if you think someone has a lot of money or they've got a lot of fame and fortune and a lot of friends, we all have struggles. And so it's developing the skills and really looking at, and you're right, there is research to show, and looking at what are those protective factors in children that create more resiliency as they get into adulthood.
And if you are going to create a resilient child, you found, or science has found, psychology has found, we can do this by being more intentional. And number one, the presence of a loving and supportive adult. And I want you to go into this, but I'm wondering, some people who grew up with lots of grit and lots of resilience because they had a really tough childhood, and maybe they didn't have the presence of that, or at least not a loving parent. But you're saying it could be the presence of any loving and supportive adult in your life.
Yes. One of the interesting things that if you ever listen to like awards speeches, any of the big awards that are out there, it is very common that those individuals, when they thank people, will thank a teacher or a coach or might be their parents, it might be their grandmother, it might be an aunt or an uncle. There is someone in their life that believed in them, that cared about them, that really was invested in their well-being. And that presence of a loving and supportive adult is really a very significant factor that promotes resiliency. Knowing that there's someone in your life that loves you and cares about you and worries about you at times. Not all children have the benefit of parents that are able to do that, but they need to attach themselves to some adult that will do that.
And as an adult, if you're a parent going, well, how do I do that? It's more than just being in the room. What's mattering is that you provide nurturing and security.
Yes. And I do think it's really important to highlight that, parents and families need to really look at this as a village, right? It's not just all their responsibility. You want to, we're going to talk about some of these other factors, right? But you want to send them to a decent school. You want to expose them to activities, extracurricular or other activities that will make them feel good about themselves. So it's really creating that environment that will allow them to feel like someone in their life really cares about them. The second one is that sense of a positive self-perception. Now, that's not like just giving your kids compliments, like you're great, or you're beautiful, or you're funny, or you're smart, right? It's not just about that. It's figuring out ways that your children can internalize that they have skills and abilities, that they're good at something, that they have capabilities, that they have a sense of empowerment and control in their life.
So that's important, because that's your second point on these 7 steps to create a resilient child, because that can make a happy life later on. And that is positive self-perception. So how kids think about themselves. And often that they're young and they're insecure and they're really hard on themselves. So how do we influence that?
It's important to remember that failure experiences are some of the best learning experiences. So it's, if you want your child to be able to internalize some positive self-perceptions, it's not by wrapping them in plastic and not allowing them to do anything. It is through failure experiences or difficulties that we learn to dig deep and work things out. If your child tries soccer and they're a terrible soccer player, that doesn't mean you have to force them to play soccer year after year. But they've had that experience. They started the season, they finished the season, and then maybe next year they try something else. Maybe they want chess, maybe they want, theater camp. It's not so much what they're doing, it's finding ways that they internalize positive self-perceptions based on having experiences and having interactions that lead them to believe that they are capable in some way.
Okay. And that also it means that we're recognizing effort, not just results, and helping our kids establish a short-term goal. So if your kid is struggling, maybe they're not doing as well in school as their sibling, or, they say, a lot of times as parents will say, well, if you get a 4.0, I'll give you X. That's not exactly what you're talking about here. It's more about the effort and less stress on the results, I guess.
Yes, I mean, not everyone's going to get a 4.0. Obviously, then there wouldn't be a Likert scale, right? It's recognizing what your child's capable of and encouraging, at times pushing them to get to the top of their capabilities or to stretch and learn new things. So it's not about being the best at everything. It's about trying things, having those experiences, learning from those experiences, sometimes setting goals. If your child's very academically oriented and they want to set some academic goals, that's fine. If they want to eat a new vegetable, 2 new vegetables during the week, whatever it is, it's not so much what they're doing, it's how they're doing it, and the fact that you as a parent are doing your best to support them. But that's just not blanket praise. You're great, you're beautiful, you're smart. I saw when you went to practice today, even though you really didn't want to, or I saw that you were tired when you left for camp this morning, but you came home and you talked about all the good things that happened in your day, right? So you're being descriptive, not just giving blanket generalities.
Okay. And number 3, self-regulation skills. And this can be hard even for adults. So how do we teach our children to manage their thoughts, their emotions, what to do when they're overwhelmed or anxious?
So this is really important. We all know people in our lives that do not have a good ability to manage their emotional states, right? They get angry, they're really angry. They get happy, they're so happy, then they miss things, or they become overly effusive. They become sad and then they don't get out of bed for days. Finding ways to regulate your emotions. That's managing your thoughts, managing your feelings, managing your behaviors. When you become super anxious, that doesn't mean that you refuse to do things and stay in your room because you don't want to have to manage your anxiety. So it's finding ways to regulate those emotions, because we will face challenging situations.
Yeah, and let's take a little deeper dive on that, because let's say your child is overwhelmed and I hate this, everything's awful, I don't want to go to school, I'm going to fail this test, or I did fail this test, I hate everything, I don't even want to take this, I don't want to go to college, whatever it is. They have those meltdown moments. So what's a script? How do we navigate that, where we can say that we're there for the meltdown and also say, actually, that's not true? And I know we don't start with that's not true. I know that's not a good way to start, even though I've done that.
Right. A lot of times it's breaking things down into small parts. Like, so what you were sharing just reminded me, my son's 24 now, but when he was in kindergarten, I remember so clearly he's a little on the anxious side. Every day he'd say, I don't want to go to school. He called it the grades. I don't want to have to go to the grades. The principal said we have to go to college, because they're trying to send positive messages. And I'd say the same thing to him every day. All I care about is today in kindergarten. That's all you need to focus on. Just today in kindergarten. So we don't need to worry about A and B and C and all these things. We don't need to worry about the grades. We don't need to worry about college. all we're worrying about is today in kindergarten. And that example is just meant to show that we need to break things down into parts. So if I had said, well, of course you're going to all the grades and you're a smart boy, and so you're definitely going to college, right? I would have just added to the overwhelm. So it's breaking things down into small parts, because no matter what is overwhelming us, it's a little easier to manage it when it's a smaller piece.
Okay. And I think I read that somewhere, and it always sticks with me, that if you're trying to start a new project or trying to do anything and you're kind of paralyzed, then the first step is too big. Make it small. Like make just make the first step smaller. So that's kind of what you're talking about, is this scaffolding of like, if they're yelling, I mean, this will happen in our house. Let's say I have a sensitive son who's all upset, and he lost something, he's forgetting, he's late, whatever the trigger was, and he's kind of like lost it at this moment. My husband, who's very calm, and steady, like, no, we're not going to yell, no yelling, and that's just how he expresses himself. So I sometimes will think, if Dr. Saunders was here, she'd probably say, let him vent, and then we're going to reel him back in, and then tell him this one small step. But how do we handle that? Because some people are they're more sensitive, they're more out there, do we let our kids have their moment and then go talk about it? Or are we trying to prevent them from having these moments?
So that's a great point, and another good example. It is important to find a way to allow some emotional expression. Now, that doesn't mean you're cursing and swearing at someone. That doesn't mean your tantrums going on for hours at a time. That doesn't mean you're destroying things, right? So I think some amount of emotional expression is important. And sometimes it might be, can you go to your room and release in there, or go out into the backyard and run around a little bit, or, sometimes doing something active, right? We say, move a muscle, change your mood. Sometimes doing something active also helps you release. So the release is important, but then finding a way to dial it back, right? So I don't necessarily want the adults to and again, it's developmental. Younger children need more adult intervention. As the children get older, they should get less adult intervention and really should work to dial it back on their own. But that is, that scaffolding, really approaching tasks, breaking them down into smaller parts, taking it one step at a time. If you've had a super disappointing situation, you don't have to fix it in that moment. At first, you just need to really mourn the loss of that, whatever it is. You didn't get on a team. You didn't make the grade that you wanted. You didn't you didn't do something that you really wanted to do. You didn't get invited to something you wanted to be invited to. You can have the feeling, but then kind of break it down into parts. But again, I don't want long, protracted, self-destructive or other destructive kinds of behaviors either.
Okay. So do you think in general with this generation that we're doing too much with our kids? We're trying to fix too many things, and we really should just let them get comfortable with being uncomfortable?
Yes. And I always think this is a very interesting, and this would be a whole other, probably a couple of podcasts, but sociological perspective, right? From the generation of individuals who, I had a lot of failure experiences. I had a lot of things that went wrong. My parents didn't manage a lot of that for me. I had to manage it on my own, but like generationally, we are the generation of parents that want to fix things for our kids. So it's really looking at that a little bit more closely from a sociological perspective. It is hard to see your child struggle or suffer or really be sad and upset. It is hard. I'm not saying it's not hard. However, and again, young children is very different than middle childhood and than teenagers, but to allow them to experience those negative emotions on their own, labeling them, identifying them, you're sad, upset, frustrated, disappointed, angry, whatever it is, having those emotions, labeling it, and then sitting with it a little bit, and then possibly offering some problem solving. But allowing them to experience those feelings on their own, I think, is really critical.
Yeah, so it might start with, if they didn't make the team, wow, I can imagine you're feeling like really rejected, or you're feeling really disappointed. And that's it. But we're not saying, hey, but I'll get you a coach. And if you just right after dinner, you can go practice, and maybe you could email the coach, and maybe there's another team, and maybe there's we want to fix things. You just want us to start with, wow, that's really disappointing.
Right. We call it reflective listening, right? You're just reflecting on what the feeling is. You're reflecting on what's going on and just kind of sitting with it. Now, again, we're not sitting with it for days and days,
Right.
but allowing our young people to sit with those emotions because they have to learn to tolerate those emotions. There will be life experiences where they ask someone on a date and they're told no, or they try to get a job and they don't get it, or they don't even get an interview, or they go through an interview and they're asked really hard questions and they don't have the answers, right? So there's going to be so many life experiences where they need to learn to tolerate those feelings and those emotions. And if we don't let them practice in childhood, it's going to lower their ability to be resilient.
Yeah. We're going to take a quick moment and just hear from one of our sponsors. I want to go back to some of the other points that you have as we continue with the 7 steps to create a resilient child or build a resilient adult, because that's ultimately the end of it. Let's hear from one of our sponsors first for a sec.
Struggling with gambling? Wheeler Health's Better Choice program offers personalized support and treatment to help you regain control. Visit wheelerhealth.org to learn more and take the first step towards recovery today.
Welcome back to the CURES podcast. And this is where we talk about health and wellness from credible sources, cutting edge information from credible sources. You know, if you're a parent, you're putting your heart and soul likely into everything that your child is becoming. You're maybe constantly questioning yourself. There's so much information out there, which is why I like to have Dr. Laura Saunders from the Institute of Living in Hartford, Connecticut here. And we're talking about the 7 parenting tips for resilient children, because resilience is protective. So we want our kids to be able to have great lives. Resilience is needed. So for point 4, Dr. Saunders, it's connection to faith and to culture. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so whether you're involved in a faith community, like a church group or faith community, whether you're involved in your culture could be Native American or African American or Latinx or Irish or Italian, Polish, whatever it is, whatever your sense of connection is, really fostering those senses, that sense of connection is important. Sometimes it's community. You know, you're from a particular town, you love that town, right? I always talk about being a Jersey girl, right? Growing up in New Jersey is a huge part of my identity. It's a part of what makes me feel connected to other people. I meet someone else from New Jersey, I feel like I know them and we have some sense of connection. So it's doing those things that help you feel more connected. So getting your children involved in their culture, in their community, in their faith group is really important to promote resiliency.
All right, and just to review, in case you're wondering, what were those steps again? Out of the 7 steps, number 1, we've talked about the presence of a loving and supportive adult. Doesn't have to be a mom or a dad, but if you are the mom or a dad, just being there and being good enough. You don't have to be perfect. Good enough, right? And positive self-perceptions. We want to help our kids think good things of themselves, meaning help them find something that they feel proud of, that they enjoy, that they're becoming good at. And now 3 is self-regulation. So important. How do they handle those big emotions? And we're at number 4, connection to faith and culture. So when we come to number 5, it's parenting competencies. And you know, we didn't all learn from great parents. And sometimes you might cringe because you're thinking, oh my God, I hated my parents said that to me and I just said it. So what do you mean by parenting competency?
So, you know, we always say this here. Parents do the best that they can, given the resources that they were raised with, right? We hope that you can make adjustments, not like massive changes, but make adjustments from the way that you may have been raised. The other reality is we're living in a different time and era. So by parenting competency, what we say is like you're being responsive to your child's needs. You're allowing them to have some emotional expression. You're expressing warmth and unconditional regard for who they are in their well-being. You're providing support, emotional support, social support, financial support, and you're building a strong parent-child bonds, right? Last week in one of the segments, we talked about the family dinner, right? And it doesn't have to be every night, even if it's a couple times a week. The importance of being together and connecting as a family is critical. But building those parent competencies, like, oh, you know what? We've kind of gotten away from family dinners. Let's bring that back in. That's making an adjustment as a parent in trying to build in more connection and communication.
Which is why in some communities, I know Hartford's one of them, will actually have parenting classes, and that may seem like I've got enough on my plate, I don't have time to do this, or why would I go to a parenting class? But we always say this, kids don't come with instructions. So the skills that the parents have of just learning how to handle their own emotions, learning how to be with their kids when they're having tough moments, how to keep them on the right path, those are all valuable things. And that brings us to point number 6. You can't really teach well if you're stressed out, if you're overwhelmed, if you're feeling anxious and depressed all the time. So mother's well-being has been linked to resilience in kids.
Yes. I'm not saying that fathers aren't important. And, it is more helpful if you have 2 parents as opposed to just one. That being said, we know that culturally, we tend to rely more on our mothers for a lot of the kind of emotional well-being of a family. Not always, but in probably greater than average circumstances. But what's so important, really for both parents, is to do things to show that they are taking care of themselves. I saw something recently that said it's not the words that you say to your kids that are going to be the most meaningful. It's the way that you cared for yourself. So, and again, I'm not talking about the other extreme, like, being so overly self-focused, but showing that taking care of yourself is important, because that's the only way that you're going to have the energy to be the best parent that you can be. So that might be doing things like going for walks and exercising and connecting with friends, right? I'm a big into social connection as a way to feel rejuvenated. Talking to other people, reading books, knitting, whatever it is that helps you get a little emotional space from the kind of the rat race of your life. That is so important. So taking care of yourself as a caregiver is very, very important, because then you're modeling that for your children.
Yeah, and we talk about perfection a lot. I think a lot of moms suffer from this, especially in the Instagram age of like, oh, I should be making the sandwich in that shape, and my house should be clean, and the kids should have perfect clothes. There's all these idealism out there of that. I know you've said, remember, these are people's highlight reels. But to give moms and dads a pass out there, when you're trying to be perfect at everything and push too hard, you're just showing your kids that they have to be perfect, which there's no way to do that, right?
Right. None of us are perfect, right? I do this for a living and I'm not perfect. But what we need to show is that if I do something or if I make a mistake, I apologize for that I made an error there, or I handled that poorly, and I'm going to try to do it again, right? It is the correction really that builds the strength in relationship. But it's the ability to take care of yourself is really what's so important, so that you can be the best caregiver for your children.
And I want to highlight that, because if you have made a mistake, maybe you yelled at your kids, maybe you handled something you didn't like, you're giving people a free pass. It's really the repair. You can actually go back, and this is super valuable, to say, I was hungry, I was tired, I shouldn't have snapped at you that way. I really didn't handle that the way I wanted to.
Right, because that's what we want our kids to do, right? Because we just talked about emotion regulation. They're going to fly off the handle. They're going to make a big mistake. We want them to fix it. So that you're modeling that you make a mistake, you communicate that, and then you work to fix it, right? It's in the repair. The strength is in the repair. I always use the muscle analogy, right? Muscles grow bigger and stronger by kind of stretching the muscle fibers, tearing them a little bit, and then allowing them to become stronger. And the more we can do that in relationships, the repair is equally as important as anything else.
Okay. And that's what we're talking about. We're trying to create resilience. So you're going to have ups and downs, but it's how you handle things when they've fallen apart. The 7th protective factor for raising a resilient child is a positive school environment. I want you to elaborate, because we may feel like we have less control about that.
Yes. We do have less control over that. I mean, sometimes people make choices about where to live based on the town that they're living in or the
yeah.
school community. I mean, anytime you look on, on any of those real estate apps, they'll tell you what school community the house is in, because that is an important factor. When you don't feel like you have control, if there's socioeconomic factors, this is just where you live. There are things that you can do to promote a better school environment, and that's by investing your time and energy as a parent. There's all sorts of data to show that the more invested parents are in their child's education, the better their education is and the better the school environment is. So there's ways to empower yourself and exert a little bit of control over a situation. If you might not be able to move out of a city because of socioeconomic factors, there's things that you can do within that system. And the reason that positive school environments are so important is because school environments get you access to resources.
So, right, you might have a social worker or someone to help you learn to deal with a learning disorder, or even help flag one. But what if the child is not doing well, like socially? They hate their friends. They feel like everyone's mean to them. That could be really dangerous I know we're not supposed to have bullying in schools, but let's be real, sometimes we still do, or it just is a bad fit. Should we really work on moving our kids out if we don't see things getting better?
Well, I do like to take the first step in investing back into the school. That is why, whether it's elementary school, middle school, or high school, that is why there are school support personnel, school psychologist, school social worker, guidance counselor. Those are the people that you go to first. I like to try to understand what the source of the problem is, or try to work with the school resource personnel to come up with some ways to solve a problem, as opposed to just jumping, because there are, families that jump from district to district to district, and that really creates a sense of disruption.
Right.
Schools I think, do the best that they can. Our teachers really work very, very hard and care very much for their students. But it's investing your time and energy in the resources that are there, going to the school support personnel if there's some difficulties, and really taking that avenue first before you just look to jump to another district.
In our final 40 seconds or so, I want to let people know you're at the Institute of Living. They can find you on Instagram, right? At Doc's, what's your handle?
Dr. Laura Saunders, ID.
Like Dr. Laura Saunders, ID. Also, you always say this, but it's worth repeating, is that time and attention are the greatest gifts you can give your kids. So if you're listening to these things, you notice none of these 7 things cost any money. Raising really strong, resilient kids does not have to be expensive. It doesn't matter about your zip code, more how you handle your relationships.
Parenting's the hardest job. We're doing the best we can. Give yourself a little break and seek support if you need it.
Absolutely. Dr. Laura Saunders, thank you as always for your mental health checkups. For everyone listening at home, please follow the CURES podcast on your favorite platform, or listen on the YouTube channel for WFSB. Have a great day, everyone, and be well.
CURES is sponsored by Wheeler Health's Better Choice program. More at wheelerhealth.org.